What is the purpose of modern education?
Aha. Well, if you put yourself through a short course in the great philosophers of Western history, it's probably true the great philosophers of Eastern history too, but I'm much more knowledgeable about our part of the world, you would find that from Plato onwards, without exception, nobody believed that what you and I call education could possibly be true for most of the population, because they were hopelessly trapped in however they were born. You could condition habits and you could condition attitudes, so you might get the simulation of a learned person, but it's we're all familiar. Plato divides people into gold, silver, bronze, and lead, I believe. Well, it's about 40 years since I've read it. You don't transmute those metals. You're stuck with them, and the base metals are a threat to the precious metals. Now move up quite a way through history to the so-called move up to John Calvin, who was a magnificently learned attorney before he became the king Protestant theologian. And read Institutes of the Christian Religion, which will certainly give anyone who reads it a headache, but not because Calvin wastes words. He has a trained lawyer's mind. He says that salvation is already decided before you're born. About 1 person out of every 20 has been selected for salvation. The people so selected cannot commit an act so heinous, mass murder, forget it. They were called justified sinners. They were going to heaven regardless of what they did. But everybody else, let's say 95% of the population, was doomed whatever they did. So forget the old Catholic idea of good works and you earn your way to heaven. There was no way to get there. Now, what Calvin proposed, since 19-to-1 odds are pretty heavy odds to deal with if you happen to be saved, he constructs brilliantly a system of mass forced education. Forced is the important word, in which the denizens of the schools are so confused by half-truths and mal-teaching that they're never going to be a serious problem to the saved again. Let's jump a few hundred years forward in history to the so-called liberal philosopher Spinoza in Holland, taught everywhere as this grand liberal and champion of freedom. There's a truth there, but it's only true for 1 person out of 20. What Spinoza wrote, and I'll give you the actual reference because I have a feeling you'll have some scholarly listeners, readers. What Spinoza said was that the vast majority of the human race is murderously irrational. There's no cure for it, just as there's no cure for being born made of lead, or no cure being born already doomed. And Calvin said there's no cure for this irrationality. And so to protect the good stuff, what has to be done is a system of universal forced schooling set up, which deliberately pumps the mind full of half-truths and outright errors, deprives the people of skill by teaching subjects rather than skills, concentration, association, expression are skills, but now we could turn that into English. What does that mean? Language arts. What does it mean? What does social studies mean? Well, it doesn't mean anything. It means whatever the particular instructor wants it to mean. So anyway, the big-time philosopher, though, who's after Spinoza, is the guy who inherits Immanuel Kant's chair at the University of Berlin. It's a fellow named Johann Fichte, spelled Fichte, and after Napoleon, with his amateur army, wipes out the Prussian army at the Battle of Jena in 1806, which takes place right under Immanuel Kant's window, right around the precincts of the University of Berlin. Fichte makes public demands on the King of Prussia. He says, we got wiped out this way, and after all, our economy's based on warfare, so that's not a good advertising. He said, we lost because sergeants thought for themselves and lieutenants thought for themselves. He demanded that the King of Prussia institute a system of forced schooling which would begin in early childhood and last until any scrap of independent critical thinking is wiped out. And according to Fichte, and of course Spinoza said exactly the same thing, the imagination is the great enemy of the best people, because if this mass that's hopeless has an imagination left alive, it can surprise their betters. So he said, you got to wipe out the imagination. Well, now that sounds like a pretty big bill of goods, but it's not a big bill of goods if you put somebody in a rigorous, time-constrained environment, you deprive them of any other source of wisdom except the official state teaching. You can do quite a number on the imagination. And furthermore, if you tell them what they're supposed to imagine. Now, the popular expression is, if you don't teach them to connect the dots for themselves, but simply to memorize what they're told to memorize. And if they're going to have chains of analyses, those are to be memorized too. It doesn't really take very long before the mind can't do this for itself. In the current issue of the Atlantic, it used to be called the Atlantic Monthly, there's an article about what the effect of prolonged joblessness is going to be on this country. And the Atlantic writer predicts joblessness will last as far into the future as we can see, that there'll be temporary recoveries, but there'll be illusions. In the course of doing that, and this is the current issue of Atlantic, March 10th, I believe, is cover date, the fellow says that the highly structured school childhoods that the young adults have come out of right now have temperamentally unprepared them for the circumstances of the moment, that the graduates dislike the idea of work, and about 1/3 of them don't even try to engage the jobs market. And these are qualities directly quoted from that article. When he's profiling what these new young men and women are like, he says they blame others for their own difficulties. They expect someone else to fix any problems they encounter. They lack independence, entrepreneurialism, leadership skills, problem-solving ability, and they need almost constant direction. We're not talking about the dunces. We're talking about the best who come out of these programs. They flounder without precise guidelines. That's what forced schooling teaches.